Okay, so to get started, we're going to, first of all, just make sure that you have the plugins installed. So if you go to Edit and go up here to Plugins, look for Niagara, and Niagara Fluids will be an option. So make sure that you select that and then restart the engine to make sure that the Niagara plugins, to make sure the Niagara plugin is loaded in. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to go up to make a Niagara system. And in the preset browser that we have here, look for gas master. And you'll see up here that there is the Grid 3D gas master emitter. I'm going to click create and I'll just call that Niagara system test and double click to go inside it to edit this up. And then if I full screen this, if I look, it'll take a second for this to compile, but then you can see that here we have our smoke rising up. Now, when you first look at it and you see the Niagara emitter over here, this is a lot. It's a lot to take in. So as an introduction, what you can do is you can look at the summary view. So if you look at the emitter summary, then it really just will expose from all this big list most of the parameters that you'll be adjusting 90% of the time. Now, if you click on emitter summary, you can see, like I have a 4090 here at home, and you can see that the emitter, it gets very choppy and doesn't play back very smooth. If you go here and you kind of minimize this view, so if you go to the triangle and you click on it right there, then it, for whatever reason, this is more of like the summary view, and you can see over here that now it's going to play back and it'll be much more responsive and faster. So the main thing to keep in mind when you're using fluids is that currently inside of Unreal, everything is bound inside your box here. So inside this box is the limits to how big this can get. So one thing to check and make sure is when you're building this, if I go here and I go to my world size and I set that to maybe 400, then you can see that the emitter box, it'll be faster because it's the resolution is a lot less, but it's going to be, like it just depends on what you need. If you need it to be a larger size, then you're going to have to make changes. You have to adjust this to be the size that you want inside of your level. So I'll go back here and I'll set that back to 800. The other thing that is important to monitor is the resolution max axis. So right now this is set to 200. So what that means is that if you look at the maximum size, like the height of this, you'll see that like it's going to take that, it's going to divide it up 200 times. So you have these, it's like the resolution of, imagine like the resolution of an image. So it's saying that instead of like 200 pixels, it's saying 200 voxels from the bottom to the top. So if I go here, and then the other ones are scaled appropriately or proportionally. So if I go to the resolution max axis over here and I set that to 400, then it's going to be a lot more detailed, but it's going to be a lot more resource intensive. So I usually keep it at around 200, just so that everything, that's a good compromise between getting it to kind of look at a high enough resolution, but then also to play back, really responsively and fast. So just for today, for this sort of introduction to it, to keep the video kind of at a manageable size, I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You'll see that at the top over here, we have these different sections that you can kind of skip through. And we'll look at maybe some of the more important settings for each one. So if I look under simulation, we can either draw the bounds on and off. So just by turning that on and off, you'll have that red box appear and disappear. Our world size, just to visualize, how big and to set how big the simulation is going to be. We have the local pivot. So that is, right now you'll notice that we have a lot of space for the smoke to, kind of go up. But if I go to the local pivot and I set that to 0, then it's going to be kind of centered inside here. So if I set it to 1, then it's going to be, raising it up that high in Z. So the default here was 0.5, which I'll keep at because that's a good size. Then we have the resolution max axis, pressure solve iterations. That is going to be how many times does it calculate the pressure. And if I would just leave it the way it is, but if you notice that if things are moving really quickly, sometimes this number may not be enough. So I've been able to like double it or have it, have more calculations, and you don't get too much of a performance hit even by doubling it. Over here we have, I'm just going to skip over a couple of these, but we have the buoyancy set up. So we have density buoyancy, and that's at negative 0.5. If I set it to 0.5, then it's going to flow downwards instead of flowing up. So again, this just is going to control, when it gets hot, what direction does it flow in. So I'll go back here and set that to 0.5. Also notice that we have density and temperature. So density represents the smoke, and temperature, when we turn that on, it's not active right now, but when we visualize the temperature, that's going to give us the visualization of fire. And then there is this dissipation. So whenever you see dissipation, that's going to be like how fast does this disappear. So right now this is not being applied to our velocity. So our velocity is being calculated and it's not losing, or it's not fading out the velocity over time. But if I were to increase that, let's say increase that to like 5 or something, then what's happening is we have the velocity at the beginning, but then over time it's kind of fading out. And so you can see that we're losing a lot of that speed as it rises up. So I'm just going to set that back at 0. And then I'm just going to skip over a few more. So over here we have our density, and here's where you can turn on the temperature. So if I go and I turn that on, then you're going to see that it's going to be visualizing that as fire. So you can see over here that brings back our fire. I'll leave this off just for now. Underneath that, we have how much is this going to dissipate. So we do have dissipation turned on for density. So over here, if I set that to like 1, then you'll see that over time, this is going to kind of fade out. You can see it starts to fade out a little bit more at the top. I'll increase that to like 5. And you can see over here that the density dissipates much more quickly. So I'll go here and I'll set that. If I set it to 0, then it means it's not going to dissipate over time at all. So the default was set to 0.3. If you ever change it from the default, you'll notice that you have these green arrows over here. If you click that, it'll reset it back to the way it was. Okay, so now if I look over here to source, the main thing right now is that it's being sourced from this sphere. So we can go in here and we can make adjustments to the sphere and how it's emitting it. You'll also notice that over here we have particle sources, which we'll be looking at in a lot more detail in a few minutes in the next part of the video. But for now, that is off. And the other thing over here is the sphere source. So under sphere source, you can enable or disable it. So if I turn that off, then that'll just be gone. If I turn that on, then all these come on over here. The main thing to keep in mind is over here you have the emission radius, like how big is this going to be. So if I set that to 50, then it's a lot smaller. If I go over here and the default is 75. Over here you can also control how much density and how much temperature is being added in on each frame. So right now the density is set to 5, but if I set that to 1, I'm going to have a lot less density in my smoke. Or if I set that to maybe 0.1, then it'll be like very, very thin smoke. You can see like we're not injecting a lot of density into our sim. And then over here, do we want to inject any velocity? So if I set X velocity to like 10, at the very beginning, it might kind of push it out in the X direction. Maybe set that to 100. And there you can see that initially it's being pushed out a little bit in X, but then eventually the buoyancy takes it and it rises up. And then underneath that, we have these noise settings. So that's why it's looking like kind of like how the smoke is churning and we have a bit of detail already in our smoke. That's because we have these noise settings set over here on them. So it's giving some initial noise, and that noise is creating this turbulence that you can see here. But again, this is only affecting it at the emission level, or like when it's first being emitted. And then if I click to the next tab over here where we have forces, this is going to be what forces can we apply while the simulation is going on. So like this area over here as it's rising. So over here, if I go to, let's say, turbulence 1, if I click on that, when I first did this, I didn't really notice like much of a difference. Like it looks pretty similar to me. But if I go here to turbulence gain and I set that to 100, you can see, and maybe I'll set it to like 1,000. So sometimes I like, when I first am adjusting these, I like really cranking them really high to see what it's really doing. And then you can see over here that like we're getting a lot of like really small bits of noise. And so when I crank it to 1,000, I'm really making this effect very strong. And you can see that this is what I'm really doing to it. But if I go to the turbulence frequency and I turn that down, let's set the frequency to a lower number, like maybe 0.01. And then here you can see that now the frequency, like we're still applying turbulence to this, but the shapes are much bigger. It's much larger turbulence that we're applying. So playing around with this size really makes a huge difference, because you can add like little small bits of noise, or you can add really big churning, really large amounts of turbulence to it. So, and then obviously you probably wouldn't want to keep it at like 1,000, but if you keep it at maybe like 500 or 200 or 100, it's going to have an effect, but it's not going to be like, so powerful. So you can see here, we're adding like this big churning kind of smoke, turbulence to our smoke. So we have this over here, and I don't really want it to be that strong or really that big. If I set it to like maybe 0.1, we're getting like these small little bits of detail here. So it really depends on what you want and how you want the effect to look inside your simulation. Okay, so you can just play around with that. Now you can also add, what's nice is that you have different amounts of it, like you have different layers that you can add on. So we have turbulence 1, and then I can come over here and do turbulence 2. So you could conceivably have like this big, amount of smoke and turbulence that we have here, and then I could go over here and turn this one on, and then do the really small detailed one. So if I go over here and I set the gain maybe to like 100 again for this one, so this first turbulence will be making like the big changes to it, and then we have this one over here which will be making the small detailed changes. So you can see like, this should hopefully give us small little details as it rises up. Then over here, there's this small scale turbulence. So let me just turn these off just for now. So we'll turn these back off, as we have something that looks very smooth. And then we have this small scale turbulence. And again, if I go over here to go to the gain, again, I like really cranking it to really see like, what is this really doing? So if I go here and I set it to 1,000, again, you can see that we got like this small amounts of turbulence being applied. Hopefully this isn't going to change the overall shape too much, but it's just going to add little bits of detail along the edges. And here you can see it says block size. So that's controlling the size of this turbulence that's being created. So if I were to make that to be quite large, let's say 50, then you can see over here what this is doing and how that's applying that. So we can, again, it's applying it in a different way than the first turbulence. This is doing it, again, and you can control it based off the size over here. So I'm going to set that maybe to, it really depends a lot on the scale of your scene and the look that you're going for. So I can go over here, and again, I won't set it to like 1,000, maybe I'll set it to 100 to give us a little bit of that extra detail along the edges. And then I can turn on both of these turbulence values over here. So you get this really wild looking smoke right now. Then over here we have collisions, and some of the collisions, first of all, it's just note that it's set up to use mesh collisions and mesh distance fields to collide with automatically. So what that means is that if I were to take my sim over here, so if I take this particle or this Niagara system and just toss it in here, you'll see that now we have this inside our scene. And if I were to take like a simple shape, so if I go over here and if I make a cube, and I'm just going to make this cube really big, just so we can see, does it really collide with everything. So I'll just go over here, and then if I go over here and go do something like this, you can see that, yeah, it's colliding with our box that we have here. And if I were to take this and slide it this way, or slide it like this, you can see that it's colliding with things. Okay, so by default, it's set up to already be colliding with things. You don't really have to do anything to adjust that. I'm just gonna delete this out of my scene just to keep everything, really responsive. So let me just go to my Niagara system and just delete it from the level, and I'll go back over here. So if I go back to my collisions tab over here, the other thing is that these boundaries, right now it's treating these boundaries as if they are open. So it's going to keep, as if it's going to keep going up, but then it just kills it. But we could actually make these collide with the edges here. So if I say, well, don't make it an open boundary, make them closed boundaries, and I do that for like all of them, then what'll happen is it's going to expand up, and then you see that it actually collides with the edges, and then it has nowhere to go. So now it's hitting the top, and then it's going to kind of go down because it has to go somewhere. So they hit the edge here. So it's not going to keep floating up. It's going to collide as if it's inside like a small room. Then the next one over here is for rendering. So if we go over here, we could change our smoke color. So if you want magical smoke or the smoke to have like a different appearance, you can do that. And then it's just controlling like, how much, if I have this, but maybe I turn down the density gain. So for the density, if I go here and I set that to like 0.1, then it's still simulating the same. It's just that when it renders it, it's going to be like a tenth of what was there before. So let me just set the color back to just plain white. The other thing that's cool is over here we have this temperature control. So if I were to go back to my simulation and I say, okay, now I want to also calculate the temperature. So now I have this over here, and then I go back to render, and the density gain was set to 0.1. So I'll go back and set that I can just reset that over here to set that back to 1. So here's my scene the way it is, the way I had it before. And now just something to take note of is under the render temperature, it's set up to render as a black body. So what that means is it's looking at how hot it is, and that's controlling the color of it. But if you wanted to, you can go over here and say, I just want to make a curve. And then now it's using this curve to control the colors of the fire. So if I go over here, I could take this, just wait for it to compile the shaders. And so now over here, this is the color that it's taking. But if I wanted it to look like, magical fire, I can come over here and do something like this. So now the temperature is not doing the black body, it's rendering, just looking at this curve. So now I have like blue fire happening inside here. The last little bit over here, we just have the quality overrides, which to be honest, I haven't really played around with this too much. But under debug, what is really helpful, and I'm just going to make my sim a little bit more simple. I'm just going to go over to the forces, and I'm going to turn off the forces just to visualize this. So I have a much more kind of gentle simulation that's happening here. And then I'm going to go to debug. And under debug, what I found most useful was down at the bottom. It says debug vectors. So I can come over here and I can say, I want to visualize the velocity that's happening inside our simulation. So now when I look at it, I actually can see all the how the velocity is being calculated throughout the scene. So this can be pretty helpful to just to get an idea of how the velocity is happening. And then what you can do also is you can visualize your turbulence. So if I go over here to my turbulence, right now I don't really have any turbulence being calculated. So I don't really see anything unusual. But if I go over to my forces and I go back here and I say, okay, let's calculate the turbulence. What'll happen now is, let's go back over here. Let me just turn on a couple. There you can see that here, this is visualizing what the turbulence is going to look like and how strong it is and what direction it's going in. So you see these colors over here, but if I look really closely, you can see that that's just telling us what direction that these are going to be going in. And then if I were to, like, you can do things like, for example, now, like my turbulence isn't moving at all. It's just as if it's moving through this pattern. But I can go over here to, there should be an offset. There should be a speed. Yeah, turbulent speed. So if I go over here and if I set that to like 10, and then let that calculate, we should be able to see our turbulence moving through this. So I'll go over here and I'll set this over here as well on this one. There we go. So now I can see that there's the turbulence, and maybe that's a bit too frantic and fast, but I can go here and I can set that to, let's say 1. So there's the turbulence, and that is going to be animating now the turbulence that's happening in our scene. So it's really handy to visualize that. Also, if I were to change the scale, so if I go here to the frequency is at 0.01, but if I set this one to like, let's say it to 1. So now you can see it's way smaller, and we can kind of see that here, that the turbulence now is not like these big shapes, they're like these really tiny small shapes. So I'll go back over here and set back to 0.1 or 0.01, I think is what I had at before. Okay, so that's why it's creating like those big shapes as it's moving around. And then if I go back and look at the velocity over here, we should be able to see the effect that turbulence is having on our velocity. And you can see how that's moving around. Okay, so just really handy things to visualize the pyrone and what it's doing to our simulation. So I'm going to turn this off, and now we're going to move into actually like what I think probably the coolest part is that if I come over to source, we're going to be sourcing from a Niagara simulation. So let's take a break here, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to have this with using the particles as the emitter. All right, so just for fun, what we're going to do is we're going to have a particle system be kind of stuck onto a character as the character is moving around. So let's go to the marketplace, and I have this, I'm going to use the Paragon character Steel, just because he has some cool animations and it's a cool looking character. So I'm going to add this to my project. So I'm just going to go here to Pyro, and this is called Pyro Demo. And I already had him downloaded, so he's already in our scene. So if I come over here and I'm going to go to Characters, Heroes, Steel, and I'm going to go to the meshes, and here's the skeletal mesh for Steel over here. So if I drag and drop him into the scene, we get something that looks like this. Okay, so there's our character. And then I want to set him up so he's animating. So I'm going to create a level sequence. So I'll go over here and let's make a folder for cinematics. And I'll call this Steel Sequence. I'll change it to 24 frames per second. And then I'm going to click on Steel, drag him into my scene. And then under animation, I think a cool animation, I think there was like a selection screen. So if I say screen select start, yeah. So if I go over here and if I hit play, okay, so we have him, so he's moving, and I'm just gonna move my camera around over here. He's in shadow right now, but it's not a big deal. But if I go over here and I hit play, let's just loop this animation. So boom, he drops it down. So I think this is a cool animation we could use to get this going. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to apply a Niagara system to him. So I'm going to come over back up to my top level. I'm going to delete the old test that I had just to keep things a bit clean. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to make a folder. And in this folder, I'm going to call this the Niagara Setups. And inside here, I'm going to create a Niagara system. And I'm going to use the preset for a simple or a single looping particle. So I'm going to click create on that, and I'll call this NS Steel. And then I'm going to double click and go inside. And this is just going to create one single particle that's there. So in order to have this kind of wrap around Steel, then what I'm going to do is first I'm going to go to the emitter, like the amount of particles. This is just creating like one particle inside here. So if I go and I look at the stack, I can go to, I want to spawn a lot of particles. So if I go to the particle spawn, and I'm going to go click on this, and I want to do never mind, it's already here, spawn burst instantaneous. So I'm going to go to the spawn count, and I'm going to just set it to be like 2,000, not 20,000, 2,000 particles here. So right now I have like 2,000 particles just over there, just all on top of each other. So then the next thing I need to do is I want to stick those particles on that skeletal mesh. So I can click over here, and I want to go to initialize mesh reproduction sprite. So if I click on that, then what that will do is over here it says we need to have a mesh applied to this. So I'm going to find the steel, and what that should do, and if I look at this, it's giving me a warning. It's because these are CPU particles. This has to be on the GPU. So I'm going to click Fix Now. And there I can see that I have these particles that are going to just be placed on top of our character. I'm not sure if it has to go into the default mesh as well, if this is just for preview. So just to be safe, it doesn't hurt anything, I'm going to go here to put that on the default mesh over here. Now the thing is though, is that steel is animating and moving around, so we want to make sure that this stays on steel as he moves. So under particle update, I can click here and I can say mesh reproduction update the mesh reproduction sprite. And then the same thing, I have to say that this is going to be on steel, and I'm going to put that on for both. You may not have to do that. I'm just doing it just because I don't know any better. So I have this over here, and then let me save this. And if I go back into my level over here, let me just dock this inside. So if I toggle this over here, I want to apply that to steel over here. So I'm going to drag and drop this into my scene. So there it is, but you can see that it's not taking his animation. All it is it's still in his default pose. So if I take the Niagara system, I'm going to drop that under the skeletal mesh over here. And I'm just going to say, it's asking me, do I want to parent this to like a bone? I'm just going to say none, but it's underneath him. And now what you'll see is those particles will be stuck onto his mesh. So if I go over here to sequencer and I hit play, then now those particles will be just stuck on his body, which is great because now we're not actually using these we're not going to actually see these particles. These are going to be just used as a source for our pyro, which is going to be coming up. So after that, I'm going to come over here, and if I double click, or if I go back over to our particle emitter, what I want to do first, I need to create the gas master emitter, but then also on these, before I do that, I'm just going to come over here, one last thing, and under particle update, I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to say, okay, I want to use these as a source for our pyrosim. So if I type in attributes, you'll see down here it says set fluid source attributes. I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that over here we have things for density and temperature, and it's going to use the particle's velocity on it. And we can set things for divergence, and it's going to use the particle's color. And so we have all this stuff over here. So this is just going to be giving us the density and the temperature, and they're both right now set to 1. So now that I have this, I need to create the gas master. So I can hit E to bring up the browser, and then I'm going to go over here, I'm going to look up gas master, and then I can see over here that there's the emitter for it. I'm going to click add. Now what that'll do is that now it's going to just create the sphere that's going to be emitting the smoke. So it's not really, even though they're in the same thing, they're not really talking to each other. It doesn't know that they each exist. So I'm going to fold this up and have it go into that emitter view, or that summary view. And then in here, I'm going to go to source. I'm going to turn off the sphere. And then over here, we have our single looping. I'll hit F2 to rename that. I'll just call this steel sprites. And then over here, if I go back to my source, there's this particle source type. And then here, I'll say I'm going to use over here, I'm going to say an emitter, which is like a particle emitter. And then over here, under emitter binding, I'm going to go here and I'm going to say I'm going to just start typing steel, and then there's steel sprites. So I'm going to click on that, and then just in a second, what should happen is it's going to look at those over here, and it should be reading that. And then in order for them to talk to each other, we have to make sure that the sprites over here are set to the GPU. And once I do that and I hit play, then you can see that over here we have our, the smoke is rising up from here. So now that we have this, I can come over here, and if I go back to my simulation, we have density, but then we also have temperature, so I can turn that on as well. And then now you can see that there's our character, like flaming steel. And then if I go back to the main over here, you can see that there he is over here. And if I hit play, then now we have that pyro that's attached to steel. And you can see that here's our sim. So what we need to do now is we need to adjust the placement of this box. And I probably don't want it to go up quite this high. And I want it to be maybe going forward a bit more, horizontally rather than just going straight up in the air. So now I can start to just make these adjustments, and maybe I'll actually pull this one out over here. So now when I look at it, because it'll update in both. So I'll come over here, and instead of it being 800 high, I'll set it to 400, and then I'll have this go, let's say in here, I'll make it go like 800. So it just gives it a bit more space. And then I could move it maybe forward a little bit, maybe like 0.2. Maybe just 0.1. So I'm just moving it here. I want him when he's jumping to come down here and hit. Then I can see we have that over here. So now it really is just a matter of tweaking this to get it to be what we want, and to have it give us the effect that we're looking for. So right now this is like really, really intense. It's also it'd be nice if it would fade out before it hits the top of the box. But a lot of this just now, and one other thing, we need to set it up inside of Sequencer to work with Sequencer. So right now I'm going to go into this tab over here for the parameters. So we have over here our parameters that kind of come with the particle system. But what we want to do is we want to make user parameters over here. So if I go over here to user parameters, I'm going to click on the plus, and I'm going to make a new user parameter. And the user parameter that I want to make, it's going to be a common type. It's going to be a float parameter. So float just means, if you're unfamiliar with this, it just means that it's going to be a number, but it can have like decimals. So it could be like 0.75. It's not like a solid number like 1, 2, 3. It could be like 1.0 or 1.2. So I'm going to call this one my density. And then I'll make another user parameter here, and again, make new common float. And I'm going to call this my temperature. Okay, so I have both of these set up over here, and then I need to make these talk to and communicate with my system. So right now these aren't going to do anything; they're just hanging around here. So if I click on my set fluid source attributes, I'm going to take my density and override my density. So I can just click on this and drag it in here, and then I'm going to say use my temperature, and you'll notice that it goes away because it's set to 0, both of them. But now what I can do is, if I save this, and then I'm going to take my Niagara system and drop it in here. And then under my steel, I'm going to go to add in a Niagara component. And in here now, we should be able to see our user parameters. So here we have my density parameter track and my temperature. So they just appear over here. So I'm going to click on my density parameter track. And over here, I'm going to turn on my temperature. So here I have my density and my temperature, and now these are animatable keyframes that I can apply inside of Sequencer. So if I come over here, what I'm going to do is maybe just before he hits, so maybe he'll start going on fire like right around here. So maybe around frame 8, I'm going to keyframe this to be at 0. Maybe actually a little bit before, maybe like a few frames before. And I'm going to keyframe both of these. And then right when he's at his height, I'm going to start this. So I'm going to say, okay, so now let's make a keyframe here of, let's say, 0.5 and 0.5. And my density, set this to 0.5. Okay, so that's going to turn on the density and temperature. Then as it goes forward, it's going to come over here, and when he hits, then I'll set that to 1, so it'll be really powerful there. And then it's going to fade off relatively quickly, so once that's done, it's going to go over here back to 0. Okay, so now if I back this up and I hit play, okay, we get this big, huge explosion that's happening, and he starts to flame up right before then. Okay, so that's looking cool. Yeah, like I'm pretty happy with how this is looking so far. So you can still see the little dots on him that are left over from like the emitters. So if I don't want that to render, I can go to NS Steel, turn off sprite render. So it's turned off. And then I come over here, and now here it is over here. So we got this. And so now the next thing is just, it's at this point, our effect is, we just need to maybe tweak it a little bit. The other thing that we could do is right now you'll notice, like, even if you hit stop, it just keeps playing, like it keeps simulating. So if I'm doing a cinematic, it's probably not the behavior that I want. I want it to just kind of just only show what it should be like on that specific frame. So I'm going to go back over here, and then I'm going to go inside of my Niagara component. I'm going to bring in a life cycle track. And in the life cycle track, just set it to desired age. And then now when I go here and I hit play, if you pause it, oops, if I go here and let's go to frame 1, if I hit play and then I pause it, then it's not going to keep on simulating. It should just show what's there. So now I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to maybe tweak some of the lighting setups and make it try to look a bit nicer. So I'm going to just simplify my lighting. I'm going to get rid of the reflection capture, the skylight, like all the lighting basically. Get rid of player start and the source light and the instance and the fog. So I'm going to delete all that stuff. So it's just a very simple scene that I have over here now. And then I'm going to add in some lights. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to... what's nice is you'll notice that Lumen is going to use this, and it'll light up our scene. So we do get lighting from the fire using Lumen. Also, if you use the path tracer, it should... Sometimes I notice some artifacts with the path tracer, but you can see over here, it should be lighting up our scene. Sometimes with the path tracer in 5.4, it doesn't, like, it just keeps, as if it's on, like, it just keeps calculating like the very first part, and it never really solidifies, but when you do a proper render, it does. It's kind of annoying. So now what I'm going to do is come up over here. I'm just going to go to lights, and I'm going to add some directional lights. So if I come over here, I'll add a directional light over here. And what you can do, what you'll notice is when we have some smoke hanging around, the smoke right now, it's not really calculating the smoke. Like, you see how it's all kind of flat white. It's not really calculating shadows here. That's what I meant to say. So if I come over here, and if you have that light selected, and I'm just going to make a look for volumetric. So here's the volumetric scattering intensity and cast volumetric, over here you can see cast volumetric shadow, and I'm going to click on that, and then that will actually make the smoke cast shadows on itself. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. I'll come over here to the other side, and maybe I'll make these lights kind of blue just to contrast the warmth of the light that's coming in. This being generated by the fire. So I can go over here and say use temperature, and I'll just make this a much cooler light. So maybe like sort of like this blue light over here. And then if I hit play, then I can see we have this. Okay, so we have that happening inside our scene. Now you'll notice that, now at this point, if you're getting ready to render, you could decide, okay, now I want to, have it at higher quality. So if I go back to my system, I can go over in here. Maybe I'll stop it from playing. And I can just go over to the resolution. I can set it to maybe like 400. This is quite a bit higher than what it was originally. So if I go here and set it to 400, then it might take a second to calculate. But now if I go back over here and hit play, we should have much higher detail. I do notice though that it does change the simulation. The simulation is really, really sensitive. And if you change things like the resolution, that can change a lot about how the simulation is behaving. So it's a lot of back and forth and playing around. It still feels, to be honest, it still feels a little bit like early days with a lot of these tools. So I'll go back to 200 and we get a very different looking simulation. Okay, but this is pretty much what I covered at Unreal Fest. So this is a very, very brief, very fast introduction to the Pyro tools inside of Unreal. But I think this is a good place for you to get started and where you can start to manipulate and start playing around with things and discovering it on your own. So hopefully this was useful for you. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to address them if I know the answers. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.